I woke up to the sound of laughter, music, and the distinct scent of fresh flowers, which was bizarre, considering I hadn't planned any sort of celebration. Blinking groggily, I rubbed my eyes and looked out the window. What I saw made me freeze. My yard, my private property that I spent years maintaining, had somehow transformed overnight into a full-blown wedding venue. Neatly aligned rows of white chairs stretched across the lawn, leading up to a lavish floral arch off to the side. Near my barn, a catering station buzzed with chefs in spotless white uniforms preparing hors d'oeuvres. A string quartet played delicate classical music by the pond, and at the center of it all, barking orders like she was royalty, stood none other than Karen, the HOA president who had made it her personal mission to treat my land like her property. Fueled by disbelief and anger, I threw on my boots and stormed outside, the gravel crunching beneath my feet. My pulse pounded in my ears. There had to be some mistake. Maybe the wrong address? Maybe a mix-up by some clueless event planner? But then I saw the giant banner. Welcome to the wedding of Sophia and James. I didn't recognize either name. This wasn't a mistake. This was sheer audacity. Karen turned just as I reached the rows of chairs, her face lighting up with a sickeningly sweet smile. She waved a clipboard like she was a queen of hospitality. "Oh, good morning, Jake," she chirped. "Isn't it just beautiful? The community's going to love it." I stared at her, dumbfounded. "Karen, what the hell is going on here?" She let out an airy laugh, like I'd told a joke. "Don't be so dramatic. It's just a small wedding. We needed the perfect outdoor venue. And honestly, your yard was the best option. You should feel honored. The bride's family is very prestigious." I took a deep breath, trying to suppress the fury building inside me. "Karen, this is my land. You can't just host a wedding here without my permission." She rolled her eyes like I was a brat throwing a tantrum. "Oh, come on. It's for the good of the community. Besides, we tried calling you. You never call me." I snapped. "You can't just decide to hold an event on someone's private property." Karen flipped through her clipboard like it held some kind of sacred law. "The HOA guidelines allow community events in suitable spaces. I've told you 100 times I'm not part of the HOA." She waved a hand dismissively. "Technicalities. You live here, don't you? That means you should contribute. It's just one day. Stop being difficult." Before I could respond, the bride and groom approached, all smiles. The bride, perfectly polished with platinum blonde curls, beamed at me. "Oh, you must be Jake. Thank you so much for letting us use your land. It's absolutely stunning." "I didn't let you use anything," I said through clenched teeth. "Karen arranged all this without asking me." The groom, a smug guy in a tux that probably cost more than my truck, chuckled. "Relax, man. No harm, no foul, right? It's just one day. Besides, everything's already paid for, and the guests are on their way." My patience snapped. "Paid who?" Karen chimed in, her tone dripping with smug pride. "To the HOA, of course. A very reasonable fee, if I do say so myself." I stared at her, struggling to comprehend the depth of her entitlement. Not only had she taken over my land, she had profited from it, all without my consent. "Oh, and by the way," Karen added, flipping through her notes, "the catering trucks couldn't park on the street, so they're using your driveway. Hope that's not a problem." I turned and looked. Trucks, vans, even a limousine. My entire driveway was jammed, blocking my own truck in. My stomach twisted with rage. I stepped in close and lowered my voice. "Move it. All of it. Now." Karen scoffed. "Jake, don't be unreasonable. The ceremony starts in an hour. Just go inside and relax. It'll all be over soon." Relax? My land was overrun. My driveway blocked. A crowd of strangers trampling my grass while Karen played queen and cashed in. No, not happening. She turned away before I could respond, waving and greeting guests like she owned the place. The bride and groom disappeared back into the chaos, completely unfazed. I pulled out my phone and dialed. My farmhand picked up. "Open the back gate," I said. "Let them out." A beat of silence. All of them. I glanced at Karen. who was now chatting with HOA members like she was hosting a gala. Every single one. He chuckled. Got it, boss. Sliding the phone back into my pocket, I casually strolled over to the buffet table and grabbed a shrimp skewer. If they wanted a wedding on a farm, they were about to get one. I stood there chewing, watching Karen bask in the glow of her own self-importance. She floated from guest to guest, fake smiling and acting like she ruled the land. The bride and groom were busy with last-minute touches, completely oblivious to the storm that was coming. My eyes flicked to the barn. The first sign of chaos arrived with a stunned gasp from one of the caterers. He pointed, wide-eyed, toward the open back gate. A deep, rumbling moo echoed across the yard. Then came the thunder of hooves. A herd of cows surged through the opening, their massive bodies thudding against the earth. Some lazily chewed hay, but others, including my particularly feisty bull Diesel, were fired up, and Diesel had locked eyes on the towering wedding cake. Chaos erupted instantly. Guests screamed as cows charged through the seating area, toppling chairs and demolishing flower arrangements. Diesel plowed straight into the cake, smashing it into a heap of frosting and sponge. The bride shrieked as sugary debris flew everywhere. The groom stumbled backward, suit streaked with dirt. Karen's face went from smug to stunned to absolutely livid in seconds. She spun toward me, shrieking, "What did you do?" I calmly wiped my mouth with a napkin and smiled. Just giving you the full farm experience. Jake casually flicked the shrimp skewer into the ruined frosting and debris Diesel had left behind. Huh, he said with mock innocence. Looks like my cows didn't get the wedding invitation. Guess they decided to crash the party. Karen opened and closed her mouth like a stunned goldfish. Spinning back toward the disaster unraveling around her, she looked utterly helpless. A cluster of elderly guests was desperately trying to leave, but one of the cows had plopped down right by the only exit, blocking the way like a furry bouncer. Nearby, an unfortunate man discovered the worst kind of surprise, his designer shoes sinking deep into a fresh pile of manure. His horrified expression said it all. And then things got worse. The goats arrived. Small, fast, and bursting with mischief, they tore across the venue with chaotic glee. One agile troublemaker launched itself onto the gift table, sending ribbons and wrapping paper flying in every direction. Another scampered onto the DJ's equipment, its tiny hooves stomping across the controls. The elegant classical music suddenly twisted into a garbled mess of screeches and distortion. Finally came the goose, Jake's infamous feathered nemesis, a large, bad-tempered white goose named Sergeant Honkers, surveyed the madness and decided it wasn't wild enough. With a furious honk, it flapped its wings like war flags and charged the groom. The man's startled yelp could have been heard from a mile away as Sergeant Honkers latched onto his pant leg, wings flailing, beak snapping. It was less of a fight and more of a complete one-sided domination. The bride rushed over, screaming, trying to pull the goose off him, which only made the bird more furious. Jake leaned casually against the buffet table, watching the chaos like it was the best episode of reality TV he'd ever seen. Karen, now flushed red and visibly trembling, stormed over. You did this on purpose. Called them off. Jake shrugged. They live here. You're the trespassers. At this point, panic had officially gripped the crowd. Some guests had climbed onto chairs in a desperate attempt to avoid the roaming cows. A group of bridesmaids crouched behind a catering table, peeking out as a goat nibbled on the hem of one of their pastel dresses. An older man stood his ground, wielding a napkin like a sword as he squared off against Sergeant Honkers. The bride broke down in sobs. My wedding is ruined. Still wrestling with the goose, the groom shouted, Who the hell throws a wedding on someone else's property without permission? Jake smirked and looked pointedly at Karen. Excellent question. Karen, finally realizing just how far she'd fallen into her own mess, raised her arms and tried to regain control. Everyone, please stay calm. It's just a crash. A cow had wandered too close to the drink station and toppled the entire table. Dozens of champagne flutes shattered, and the expensive bubbly poured into dirt, mixing with cake crumbs and cow droppings. It was officially a war zone. Jake took a deep breath and smiled, basking in the scent of justice and manure. I'm calling the police. Karen screeched. Jake clapped his hands, grinning. Please do. I'd love to hear how you explain throwing an unauthorized wedding on private property. Karen froze, her eyes darting, brain clearly short-circuiting as she tried to think of a way out. Meanwhile, a few guests gave up entirely, making a break for their cars. The bride collapsed onto a chair, mascara streaking down her face as she clung to her bouquet like it was her last shred of dignity. The groom, now goose-free and covered in dirt and feathers, turned on Karen with venom in his voice. This was your idea. You said everything was handled. Karen, on the verge of full meltdown, stammered. It was taken care of. This is unbelievable. The groom turned to Jake, sighing heavily. Look, man, I don't know what Karen told you, but we had no clue this wasn't allowed. If we'd known, we never would have agreed to any of this. Jake looked him over. Still cocky, still clueless, but not nearly as deranged as Karen. He gave a slight nod. The bride, now full on sobbing, screamed at Karen, You ruined my wedding. Karen stood frozen, a complete shell of her former self, as the reality of the disaster settled over her like a storm cloud. Jake stretched, arms above his head, and let out a satisfied sigh. Well, he said, grabbing one of the last remaining snacks from the wreck buffet, I'd say that was an eventful day. Karen shot him a glare that could burn holes through steel. But she didn't say a word, because for once, she had nothing left to say. The wedding was officially over. The guests were either gone or wandering around in stunned silence, trying to salvage what dignity they had left. The once pristine venue Karen had proudly organized now resembled a battlefield, overrun by farm animals, littered with half-eaten food, and soaked in humiliation. Jake cast one last amused glance at the wreckage before casually strolling back toward his house. Behind him, Sergeant Honkers let out one final triumphant hunk, sending Karen into another round of panic shrieking. Best wedding ever, Jake muttered with a satisfied grin. Karen stood frozen in the middle of the chaos, her once white designer blouse smeared with cake and mud, her hair frizzing wildly in the humid air. Her carefully curated reputation now hung by a thread. Around her, chairs were overturned, decorations lay in tatters, and cows continued to munch lazily on any leftover snacks or floral arrangements within reach. The bride sat on the ground sobbing into the remains of her veil, while the groom paced furiously, spitting out a new curse with every step. Some guests were making a quiet retreat to their vehicles. Others simply stood in shock, watching the fallout like survivors of a natural disaster. Jake leaned against a fence post, arms crossed, watching Karen's collapse like it was a season finale of his favorite show. She kept opening her mouth to speak, but no words came out, just stammers and stunned silence. A small crowd of HOA board members had gathered around her, some whisper behind their hands. Others just glared at her openly, the realization of what she'd done settling in fast. Then came the first voice of fury. The bride's mother, a woman who had spent the last hour alternating between screaming and dabbing her daughter's tears with a monogrammed handkerchief. Karen, you told us everything was handled. You said this was a real venue. You said the owner had agreed. Her voice rose to a shrill screech on the last word, making several nearby guests wince. Karen's lips trembled. Well, I thought it was fine. Jake wasn't using the land for anything important, so I figured. You figured? The bride's father interrupted, stepping forward with a face like a thundercloud. Do you have any idea how much this wedding cost? We paid the HOAU thousands of dollars, and this is what we got. He gestured to the mayhem, a cow chewing on the shredded remnants of the wedding arch, the gift table overturned and strewn with envelopes, and a goat still standing proudly atop a toppled speaker, like it had conquered a kingdom. Karen threw up her hands, desperately searching for someone to blame. Her eyes landed on Jake, and her face twisted into fury. This is your fault. You let your animals loose on purpose. You sabotaged the whole wedding. Jake didn't even flinch. And who exactly gave you permission to throw a wedding on my land? A hush fell over the HOA board. Some members started to quietly inch away, suddenly realizing this was a fight they wanted to be in. Finally, an older woman with oversized glasses stepped forward. "Karen, you told us Jake had agreed to this. That's the only reason we approved it." Jake let out a sharp laugh. "Approved it? You don't get to prove anything on land that isn't yours. I don't belong to your precious HOA, remember?" Karen's mouth opened and closed like she was suffocating, her carefully constructed fantasy crumbling around her. "You lied to us," the bride snapped, mascara streaking down her cheeks. "You lied to everyone." The groom, brushing hay off his shoulders, sighed in disgust. "We're getting our money back. Every last cent." Karen forced out a nervous laugh. "Oh, well, I think we'll have to go through the HOA treasury, too." "The treasury that you control," the bride's father snapped, his face turning redder by the second. Karen gulped. This wasn't just bad, this was criminal. Jake leaned back against the fence, watching as the crowd slowly turned on her. Even her board members were starting to mumble about misused funds and holding an emergency vote to remove her from leadership. Things were unraveling fast. And then the siren started. Karen spun around, wide-eyed. "Oh, thank God," she cried. "Officers! Arrest him. He let his animals loose and destroyed our wedding." Two uniformed officers stepped onto the property, surveying the mess. One adjusted his hat. The other pulled out a notepad. "Whose property is this?" Jake raised his hand casually. "Mine." The officer nodded. "And you didn't give anyone permission to host an event here?" "Nope." Karen let out a strangled, high-pitched gasp. "He's lying. He's just trying to make trouble." The officer ignored her and turned back to Jake. "These folks paid the HOA to hold an event here." Jake nodded toward the fuming bride's family. "Yep, paid Karen directly." The officer turned slowly back to Karen. "So, you accepted money for an event held on property you don't own?" Karen's face drained of all color. She stammered, hands flailing. It was just..." The bride's father stepped forward and held up his phone. "We got receipts." The officers exchanged glances. "Ma'am, we're going to need to ask you a few questions down at the station." A collective gasp echoed from the crowd. Karen's eyes went wide with terror. "What?" "No, this is insane. I didn't do anything wrong." Jake shrugged. "Tell it to the judge." As the officers led us shrieking, flailing Karen toward a patrol car, the guests began gathering their things. The bride, still shaken, paused and looked at Jake. "For what it's worth..." "I'm sorry." Jake gave a small nod. "Next time, make sure the venue is actually yours to rent." She nodded sadly and followed her parents toward their car. The groom trailed behind, still looking like he was questioning every decision he'd ever made. The remaining HOA members stood awkwardly, watching their fearless leader disappear in the back of the squad car. One of them cleared his throat. We'll be in touch." Jake smirked, looking forward to it. As the last vehicle pulled away and the sirens faded into the distance, Jake stretched his arms overhead and let out a deep, satisfied breath. Sergeant Honker strutted past him, wings fluffed in pride, like a true warrior. Jake patted him on the back. "Good work, soldier." With that, he turned back toward his house, already wondering what kind of nonsense the HOA would try next. Whatever it was, he'd be ready. The next morning, Jake woke up expecting peace and quiet. What he got was a buzzing phone and a half-panic call from his farmhand. "Boss, you might want to check your front yard. You've got company." Groaning, Jake threw back the blanket and trudged outside, hoping Karen had finally accepted defeat. He was wrong. Parked by his fence was an official-looking city vehicle. Two men in button-down shirts stood beside it, arms crossed, surveying his property like it was a construction site. And standing with them, folder in hand, animatedly gesturing and ranting, was none other than Karen. Jake sighed and adjusted his hat. "So much for peace." "Morning, gentlemen," he called out as he approached. "Something I can help you with?" One of the men turned to respond. One of the inspectors stepped forward, offering Jake a courteous but firm nod. "Mr. Jake, we received several complaints about code violations on your property. We're here to conduct an inspection." Jake barely resisted the urge to roll his eyes. Complaints? From who? The second inspector cleared his throat and glanced toward Karen, who stood nearby wearing the overly sweet expression of a self-proclaimed concerned citizen. From multiple members of the Homeowners Association, she said, as though she hadn't just been publicly humiliated in front of half the town. Your farm animals are creating disturbances. There are also claims your land usage violates local zoning laws. Jake crossed his arms, unimpressed. Zoning violations? That's interesting. I've owned this land for years without a single problem. Until now. Karen gave a theatrical sigh, clutching a folder to her chest like it was a lifeline. It's not personal, Jake. It's about maintaining the integrity of the community. After yesterday's unfortunate events, several residents expressed concerns about whether your property is compliant. Jake let out a humorless laugh. So let me get this straight. You trespassed on my land to throw an illegal wedding, got arrested, and now I'm the one being investigated? Karen's smile flickered, but she quickly recovered. It's not about the past, Jake. It's about moving forward. The first inspector gave a small cough, visibly uncomfortable. If we could just take a look around, Mr. Jake. If everything checks out, we'll be on our way. Jake considered kicking them off his property, but decided against it. He had nothing to hide, and he was curious to see just how far Karen was willing to push her petty revenge. He stepped aside. Be my guest. The inspectors began their rounds, making notes as they walked the property. Karen trailed behind them like a smug shadow, pointing out everything she could, the barn, the fencing, even the water troughs, hoping something would stick. But as the inspection dragged on, her confidence faded. Her eyes narrowed with each passing minute. Eventually, the inspectors returned, flipping through their notes. Mr. Jake, one of them said, everything appears to be in full compliance. Your land is properly zoned for agricultural use, your animals are well maintained, and we found no violations. Karen's smile faltered. But what about the safety concerns? His animals are dangerous. That goose attacked a guest. Jake grinned. You mean Sergeant Honkers? He's just not fond of trespassers. The inspectors exchanged a look, clearly unimpressed. Ma'am, one said, farm animals on a farm aren't a violation. Karen's face turned red. But the noise, the smell, Ma'am, the second inspector cut in, more firmly this time. Everything here is legal. Unless there's something new, we're done. Jake had to bite back a laugh as Karen sputtered, her mouth opening and closing in disbelief. But she couldn't come up with anything else. The inspectors packed up, gave Jake a nod, and drove off, leaving Karen alone in a cloud of dust. She turned to Jake, fists clenched. You think this is over? She hissed. Jake leaned against the fence, calm and cool. I was hoping it was. Karen stepped forward, her eyes blazing. You humiliated me. Do you know how much that wedding cost? Do you know what I've lost because of you? Jake raised an eyebrow. Let me guess, the HOA is turning on you? Karen let out a bitter laugh. Of course they are. They're cowards. The second things got hard, they abandoned me. Jake shrugged. Maybe if you hadn't lied, stolen someone's land, and tried to cover it up, they wouldn't have. Karen's jaw tensed like she might grind her teeth to dust. You think you're untouchable. Jake sighed, his patience finally worn thin. Karen, the only reason you're not in jail for trespassing and fraud is because I chose not to press charges. So if I were you, I'd walk away while I'm still feeling generous. For the first time, Karen paused. There was a flicker of doubt, maybe even fear, in her eyes. Then, with a sharp turn, she stormed her car and tore off down the road. Jake exhaled, running a hand through his hair. He knew Karen. She wouldn't go down easy. She'd claw and scratch until she had nothing left. His phone buzzed. A message from an HOA member. Emergency HOA meeting tonight. Karen's losing control. Thought you'd want to know. Jake smirked. Things were about to get interesting. That evening, Jake sat on his porch, sipping a cold drink as the sun dipped below the horizon. It was peaceful, a welcome contrast to the chaos of the past 2 days. He knew Karen wouldn't accept defeat quietly, but the cracks were showing. If the HOA meeting went the way he suspected, tonight could be the final nail in her coffin. He debated skipping it. He wasn't even part of the HOA, and their internal drama wasn't his problem. But the thought of watching Karen finally get what she deserved was too satisfying to pass up. He stood, dusted off his jeans, and made his way to the neighborhood clubhouse. The meeting was already underway when he arrived. The atmosphere was tense. Gone were the polite smiles and hollow chatter. Now there were glares, whispers, and quiet resentment. Karen sat at the center of it all, stiff and defensive, white-knuckling the armrest of her chair. Jake leaned casually against the doorway, arms crossed, watching the show. One of the board members, a bald man with sharp eyes, stood and addressed the room. Let's get to the point. We all saw what happened at that wedding. We know who's responsible. Karen straightened, forcing a tight smile. Yes, and I think we need to talk about Jake. His disregard for community standards, The man held up a hand, cutting her off. Karen, stop. We're not here to talk about Jake. We're here to talk about you. A wave of murmurs and nods echoed through the room. Karen's face twitched. I've always done what's best for the community. A woman in the front row scoffed. You stole money from residents. You lied about the wedding venue. You almost got us sued. That's not best for the community. That's reckless. Karen, clench your jaw. That wedding was important. It brought prestige and connections. It brought embarrassment. Someone else snapped. And legal problems. Jake smirked, enjoying the unraveling. A man with glasses, who'd been silent until now, finally spoke. There have been discussions about a vote. Karen's eyes widened. A vote? The bald man nodded. To remove you as HOA president. Panic flashed across Karen's face. You can't do that. I built this HOA. I kept it running. And in that time, the woman in front said, You abuse your power. You fine people unfairly. You enforce ridiculous rules. And now your arrogance has cost us thousands. Karen's hands gripped the table, knuckles white. I've always acted in the community's best interest. There was laughter, bitter, hollow. The bald man sighed. Karen, we already have the votes. She shook her head furiously. No, you don't. The man with glasses pulled out a stack of sign papers. We do. Karen's breathing grew shallow. You can't do this. I won't step down. You don't have a choice, the bald man said. We're voting now. One by one, hands rose around the room. Karen looked for allies, but found none. Even her former supporters stayed silent. It was over. Her face went pale. Jake stepped forward. Looks like the community finally decided what was best. Karen turned on him, eyes full of fury. This is your fault. Jake raised an eyebrow. Oh, did I tell you to steal money? Did I tell you to use my land without permission? Did I tell you to lie? Karen had no response. The truth didn't leave her much room to argue. Karen, the bald man said, you have 1 week to vacate your position. After that, we'll elect a new president. Without a word, Karen stood so abruptly her chair screeched against the floor. Then she stormed out, slamming the door behind her. Jake let out a whistle. Well, that was fun. A collective sigh of relief spread through the room. As Jake turned to leave, the bald man called out, Jake! He turned. Yeah, thanks for everything. Jake smirked. Don't thank me. Thank my cows. The man chuckled. Fair enough. A few days later, Jake got an unexpected visitor. It was a bride from the disastrous wedding, standing at his gate, looking sheepish. He crossed his arms. Something I can help you with? She gave a small laugh. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. I didn't know Karen lied about the venue. If I had, I never would have gone along with it. Jake studied her for a moment, then gave a small nod. Fair enough. And the lawsuit? She winced. Yeah, that's not happening. My dad is suing Karen instead. He's furious. Jake chuckled. Can't blame him. She reached into her bag and handed him an envelope. This is for you. Jake opened it. A check. For the damage, she said. It's the least I can do. Jake considered refusing it, but then thought about the mess still left to clean up. He nodded. Appreciate it. She gave a small smile. "Take care, Jake." As she walked away, Jake looked down at the check. It wouldn't erase everything that happened, but it was a decent end to the chaos. Sergeant Honker strutted past, honking proudly. Jake smirked. "You and me both, buddy." He turned back toward the house, wondering how long it would be before the HOA tried something stupid again. Whatever it was, he'd be ready